here. Thank you so much to Benoit and Frank and the Sharethrough team for putting together what's an awesome and very important event as well. I was speaking with a few of you over the lunch break, and an event like this, even 2 years ago, would have been just science fiction. So thank you so much for making the time and coming here to speak about this very, very important topic. So I'm Richard Davis. I'm the CEO and co-founder of 51 to Carbon Zero. We are a mission-driven company. We are all about decarbonizing, and our ultimate objective is in the next 10 years to kick out of the atmosphere 2% of global carbon emissions. And to do that, we want to empower extraordinary change makers like you guys in the media industry and beyond to make a difference. So we've got a platform that helps you measure and decarbonize at speed. Now, we're based in London, but we work with a lot of you in the room here in the US and North America, of course, with Sharethrough, with MIQ, with the likes of Pubmatic and Sonobi and many others. I come from the industry myself. I spent 15 years at Dentsu. I was Chief of Business Strategy and Transformation based in London for the Dentsu Media Global service line. And I just experienced that pain of trying to make sense of what this is all about, getting the data in, having a clear picture of where to go to, and then activating and executing on a plan, both internally and in terms of go-to-market product proposition. And I just thought I want to help people make it in a more sleek, efficient, platform-based way. So that's what we're all about on 51 to Carbon Zero. Now, today I'm going to talk about 5 steps to build your company path to net zero. And my promise to you is to make this simple and easy to understand. And you'll keep me honest on this. You'll tell me later if I made the job. Before we get into the weeds of the 5 steps, and let's see if I can get this right. No. There we go. It's a green button, by the way. Just a couple of definitions. So what does it mean to be net zero versus carbon neutral? Because people kind of mix up the two definitions. So net zero is about decarbonizing. It's about reducing the emissions in your business operations down to 90% and then offsetting the rest. Being carbon neutral is about investing in a project somewhere else in the world that takes out of the atmosphere the same amount of carbon that you are creating in your business operations. So it's about compensation. Net zero, decarbonization, carbon neutral, compensation. Today we're going to talk about net zero, so decarbonizing. And decarbonizing, as Jean-Marc was saying before, is a transformation effort. You are really changing the way that your business operates. So what is the transformation all about? What's the focus? So we've been talking a lot about campaign emissions. So the emissions related to creating, delivering, and consuming an ad, essentially. And that's super important. Now, there is the other side of the moon, if you will, the other side of the equation or the story, which is your company-wide emissions. And that's what I want to focus the next 20 minutes or so on. This is how you operate as a business, your offices, the way you travel, the materials that you use, et cetera, et cetera. And the critical thing is to keep both in mind, because if you've got both in mind and you're measuring and doing something about both, then you're tackling your total footprint. And that's a very important point, your total footprint. So again, people are asking me, so do you guys compete with Scope 3? Not really. We complement each other. Actually, we work together on quite a few clients. Scope 3 looks at the campaign emissions. We look at the company-wide emissions. And for example, the work we're doing with Sharethrough is exactly on both sides. So they can have a green PMP, but also commit to SBTI, which is the science-based target initiatives that you have been hearing about quite a few times now during the day. So total footprint. Why is the company-wide emission side of the story important? Because that is what brands and agencies are asking the supply chain about. When you receive an RFI and an RFP, they will ask you about your company-wide emissions. These are some data points from the UK, which is a more advanced market when you look at like emission legislation and consumer sentiment on this. But it's a good sense of what's going to happen here very soon or happening already. So 83% of buyers have not worked or are not willing to work in the next future with partners who don't hit specific climate/sustainability criteria. So it's important. It's important now. I'm sure you see lots of these acronyms coming up in RFIs and RFPs. And the point here is not to go through all of these. You will learn about them, I'm sure, in the coming weeks and months. But brands are asking you to be compliant with a number of standards and disclosures about how you operate as a business, as a company, your company-wide footprint. Now, the beauty of this is that, yeah, there are different frameworks and disclosures, but the same GHG, greenhouse gas data, underpins all of them. So if you crack that piece, then you can actually comply with all of this. Right, so what are the 5 steps to get to net zero, or to start the journey? Let me first walk you through what they are, and then we can go more into the how to do them. So the first one, as you would imagine, is about measuring. Obvious. But the reality is, most companies do not measure. And those who do might not do it appropriately. This is some BCG research. 91% of companies failing to measure emissions appropriately. And we'll talk a little bit why that is the case in a sec. So measure, number 1. Then focus. Brian made this point earlier on. 80-20. There will be a few hotspots that make most of your emissions. Yeah, there are like 100 things you want to measure, but focus on the top 5. And if you zoom out for a second and think about the globe, the top 5 emitting countries account for more than half of global emissions. Actually, the top 10, 75% of global emissions. It's the same in companies. Your 3 top 5 hotspots will make the bulk of your emissions. So focus on those. And then commit, externally and internally. And committing is important. It's not just a PR piece, really. It's about driving the enthusiasm of people internally and externally, and the expectations. They will want you to do something. They will hold you accountable if you commit to do something. And that's why it's important. Then activation, so executing the plan. And this is where things get a bit tricky. And it's exactly like in media. You got a great consumer insight, you got a plan, you got some KPIs agreed with the client, but then it's time to deliver. And that's where things get a bit tricky. Less than 1% of companies have a credible climate activation plan. And this is from CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Program, which is a third-party, neutral, non-profit body which looks at all the companies disclosing carbon and makes their emissions available online for everyone to look at. And they've got like a 27 criteria that you need to go through to have a solid plan. Just below 1% of all companies actually measuring and disclosing have a credible carbon plan. And then engaging. And this is true across any facet of corporate change, really. You need to engage people in other parts of the business to work with you. You might have sustainability in your remit, part of your KPIs, but the guys who need to decarbonize somewhere else in the business might not, or might not be in your team, so you need to get them on board. Lack of support from other business functions is the number 1 challenge, the number 1 barrier, friction for decarbonization success. So we talked about what the 5 steps are. Allow me to be your Mr. Miyagi and tell you a little bit more about how to go about these 5. And I put like Karate Kid there, not because it's a great movie, first of all. I watched it on the way here. But it's all about mindset and attention to detail. And those 2 things are super important once you start to go through the 5 steps. Attention to detail. How do you measure? How do you measure? This is a thing Nick during the lunch break was asking me, okay, right, you got like 1,000 different data points. How do you do that? So there are 2 ways, essentially, that you can measure your carbon footprint. 2 data points that you can use in your model. One is spend data, one is activity data. One we like and one we don't. And I'll let you guess which one is which from what you see on screen. So a spend-based footprint is essentially based on how much you spend on energy or business travel, how much you spend on paper. An activity-based footprint is all around the units of each good and service that you buy, that you consume, how many kilowatt hours of electricity, how many kilometers have you traveled, and with what mean of transport. how many tons of paper if you're a publisher. This is the right way to look at your footprint because you have an accurate picture of what it looks like. With the spend-based approach, you've got like a very foggy picture in a way because how much a flight costs is driven by a gazillion things, like is it high season, are you booking like a day in advance, et cetera, et cetera. Kilometers traveled, or miles, apologies, stays the same. Also, if you use spend-based data, you'll get a much, much bigger footprint. So we ran an exercise with an SSP back in the UK, looking at their footprint from a spend and an activity-based point of view. The spend base was 8 to 10 times bigger, depending if you included everything in scope. And that's because the GAG protocol, which is that little logo you see on the top right, which is the standard accounting protocol for global footprints, wants you to use activity data. So they're very punitive if you use spend-based data. And then on the last point, if you use spend-based data, the only way to decarbonize and reduce your footprint is to spend less, which in media doesn't go down well in general. So if you look at activity data, you can consume less, which is good. Now, you know what type of data you want to use. How do you consume the data? And spreadsheets versus platforms, if you will. And hopefully, I don't have to convince this type of audience that platforms are the way forward versus spreadsheets. But I lived this pain myself back at Dentsu, 150 offices, tried to collect the data via Excels and emails. It's not workable. A platform gives you data in a structured way, comes in automated, is shareable, you can build insights on it, you can use whatever visualization you want on top. It's just a way to go forward. Now, you know what to measure and how. You want to use spend-based data, you want to use a platform. Let's now focus, number 2 step, on the big tickets. So there will be consistently across the value chain or the media ecosystem hotspots that will recur over and over again. And they will vary slightly or ever so often if you are in different subverticals, if you will, of media. If you're an agency, an ad tech, or a publisher in this case. If you're an agency, you're a people business, you will have more impact from commuting and working from home, and that type of stuff. If you're an ad tech company, cloud emissions or your data servers, if you own them or you've got them in co-location. If you're a publisher, and if you're a digital and non-digital publisher, you will want to look at your materials, your paper, how you distribute those magazines down to the retailer. If you're running events, waste and food, all the stuff that we're doing here. So things will vary. There will be like consistent emission hotspots like energy and business travel, but then there will be nuances depending on where you sit in the media ecosystem. Focus on those. Measure those even more granularly, measure them frequently, and make sure you got KPIs on those. The rest will come. With this, you change 80% of your footprint. Now, you know where to focus. What do you do about it? So there are a number of initiatives that you can then start to activate and implement across those hotspots. And the way we usually go about it with clients is to map them out based on their ease and impact. And of course, you want to start with the easy one that have got the biggest impact, I would imagine. Now, just to give you a few practical examples, with Sharethrough, for example, we're working on quite a piece of work on cloud emissions, and we're looking at the AWS setup that they have and how we can look at the server location and the CPU downtime, et cetera, et cetera. Look at those things if you're in the ad tech space. If you are more in the agency world, probably most of your footprint comes from your offices and people traveling to the office. So with the MIQ guys back in London, we're looking at energy efficiency in the office. And it's amazing how a few things like smart meters, et cetera, can save you money and emissions quite quickly and quite effectively. And if you are in publishing and you are printing and distributing magazines across the country, you definitely want to look at the paper that you use, and then you want to look at the logistics. Interestingly enough, we were speaking with Immediate Media back in the UK. Retailers are now asking, what is the carbon footprint of the magazines coming to my stores? So you need to be able to isolate that, because that's their scope 3, in a way. So is an impact. Look at what's doable out there on those top hotspots. Make sure you have measured them in a granular, active, and actionable way with not spend, but with activity data. Then, if you want to be successful, and I think Jean-Marc touched on this this morning, you have to have the right organizational setup. And this is the boring bit, but it's the very important bit. You need to have that accountability and governance and organizational setup crystallized, formalized, and shared in the business. If you want to achieve net zero, you need the C-level people involved. They need to know if they're spending the money in the right way. So they need the data to come in the best possible way to know if they're investing in the right space. So you need people across the business who are activating those reduction initiatives to give you the data, to be on the same page or the same platform, if you will, to make sure they are KPI'd as well on achieving those reductions, and that everything runs on a data spine or a data backbone, which is consistent, easily accessible, and centralized. And this is true across any organizational change, really. It's not just decarbonizing. It's digital transformation, it's reorganization, it's everything you do in corporate life. And then it's about engagement. We said that's point number 5. And identifying the right audiences that you are trying to get on board in the business is super important. So the core audiences will probably be, most cases, 2. Data owners and target owners, as we call them in 510. Data owners are the guys who will give you the data that you need to measure footprint and track performance going forward. Target owners are those in charge of decarbonization initiatives. They might be the same people from time to time, they might not be. So within our platform, we bring them together so that they've got a shared understanding of what's happening, and you can start to cross-pollinate initiatives and celebrating success. And face-to-face, still super important. So we do town halls and face-to-face meetings, workshops with different parts of the business to make sure that people live and breathe and understand and can ask questions about what is important, what do we need to do, how do we do it, by when, and how much do we need to spend on this, and what's the return. And then change at the individual level. The last screenshot that you see there from Tribal Data, which is a partner of ours, is an app that helps you as individuals understand your footprint and reduce your footprint and take action. And that's the most important bit, really, because change really starts from us. Whether you install solar panels at home, you go vegan for 1 day a week, you switch to renewables at home, etc., etc. Because those small changes change your mindset back to the Karate Kid thing. And that's super, super, super important. So we offer a platform that brings all of that together across the 5 steps. We try to make it really easy to understand for people, because what we don't want is to people to be paralyzed by this being too difficult. That's the last thing that we need. That's the last thing that the planet needs. You know, I think, Frank, you were talking about 2030 this morning. It's just around the corner. It is just around the corner. But we've got an amazing opportunity to make a difference. Future generations will judge us on what we have done today. And this can be enjoyable and exciting and something that we can really all be proud of, leaving a legacy, not just for the industry, but for the planet more in general. So thank you so much.